Hey there, this is James Carberry, founder of Sweetfish Media, and one of the co-hosts of this show. For the last year and a half, I've been working on my very first book. In the book, I share the three-part framework we've used as the foundation for our growth here at Sweetfish. Now, there are lots of companies that have raised a bunch of money and have grown insanely fast, and we've featured a lot of them here on the show. We've decided to bootstrap our business, which usually equates to pretty slow growth. But using the strategy outlined in the book, we're on pace to be one of Inc.'s fastest growing companies in 2020. The book is called Content-Based Networking: How to Instantly Connect with Anyone You Want to Know. If you're a fan of audiobooks like me, you can find the book on Audible, or if you like physical books, you can also find it on Amazon. Just search Content-Based Networking or James Carberry, Carbary, in Audible or Amazon, and it should pop right up. All right, let's get into the show.
Hello, and welcome to the B2B Growth Show Monthly Book Talk. I'm Douglas Burdett, host of the Marketing Book Podcast, where each week I publish an interview with the author of a new marketing or sales book to help my listeners succeed in the quickly changing world of marketing and sales. Joining me is my friend James Muir, author of The Perfect Close: The Secret to Closing Sales, the Best-Selling Practices and Techniques for Closing the Deal. I read every book featured on the Marketing Book Podcast, but James reads even more books than I do, and he listens to every episode of the Marketing Book Podcast. So I'm delighted that he can join me. And if either of us can recommend any marketing or sales books or other resources for whatever situation you find yourself in, please feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn, where we can chat, and we'll do our best to point you in the right direction. In this monthly episode of the B2B Growth Show, we briefly recap some of the key ideas from the marketing and sales books that were recently featured on the Marketing Book Podcast. James, welcome back to the B2B Growth Show Book Talk.
Thank you, Douglas. In this episode, we're going to talk about 4 recent books featured on the Marketing Book Podcast, which are Lessons, Essays to Help You Embrace the Chaos by Mark Schaefer, The 3-Minute Rule, Say Less to Get More from Any Pitch or Presentation by Brant Pinvidic, They Ask, You Answer, a revolutionary approach to inbound sales, content marketing, and today's digital customer. This is the revised and updated 2nd edition by Marcus Sheridan. And Social Media Success for Every Brand, the 5 story brand pillars that turn posts into profits by Claire Diaz-Ortiz. So on to the books. First up, we've got Lessons, Essays to Help You Embrace the Chaos by Mark Schaefer. Now, Mark Schaefer is now officially the king of the Marketing Book Podcast with 6 appearances. So I loved all the interesting questions he brings up in this book. Tell us a little bit about Mark Schaefer and Lessons.
And for those listeners in the UK, we don't mean a king like, that monarchy. We're talking about a king like Elvis Presley,
the real
king of rock and roll. And Mark lives in Tennessee. Elvis lived in Tennessee. I mean, the similarities are just amazing. But Mark has been on the podcast 6 times. So the 5th time he was on, he got a week at my beach house. This time I gave him one of my wife's horses. Now, my wife doesn't know I gave one of her horses away, but I told him, we're going to save a fortune because that animal eats better and gets better health care than I do. So I didn't really give him a horse, but I can dream, can I? So this book was a new approach that he's done, and it's only on Kindle, and it was a recap of several, I want to say 30 or so blog posts that he had done over the last couple of years. And he's a prolific blogger. They probably blog 5 times a week at his blog. And there have just been some real gems. And so he resurrected this, and it really was just excellent. And there were so many things that we talked about, and we can't obviously cover, all of them. But some of the real highlights in there was where he talks about how chapter 5, it's titled Why Marketing is Lost.
Yes.
And you may remember that, James, where he talked about how marketing technology is actually one of the biggest problems with marketing now because, as he says, it's becoming synonymous with creating customer hate at scale. And it's really wringing all the humanity out of marketing that used to be there. And he said a lot of marketers are having a problem with that and not thinking like a human. And you actually have to go even further in trying to portray humanity and vulnerability and so forth in marketing, which is largely digital these days, because it can seem so impersonal because you're not there with somebody, and at least not right away. Another thing that he talked about that I found very interesting is he really cannot stand how people don't understand this concept of hustle that seems so pervasive today. He said it's like it grates on him like a rake on rocks. And there are certain marketing and sales gurus out there who are always talking about the hustle. And a lot of people are misinterpreting that. And he talks about this concept of hustle shaming. Like, if you're not working as hard as I am, you're not going to be successful. And he's just saying that's really toxic and it's not good advice. You should be focused on working smarter. Obviously, you have to do hard work, but it's not about some sort of breastfeeding about just how hard you're working.
He calls it the bigotry of hustle.
Yes.
A lot of people get sucked into that, and then they end up losing family and friends and all that just because of all in the name of hustle.
Yeah. Now, he wrote a book a few years ago called Content Shock. And this was based on a blog post he did a year before that got like 1,000 comments on it. And basically he was talking about how there's so much content out there now. I think Alphabet has, Eric Schmidt, the chairman or past chairman, had said that if you took all the content that was ever produced up until the year 2003 in the world, that content is now being produced every day. It's staggering. There's too much out there, and it's having this effect on people. And one of the things that's, and in the book, he talks about how you can no longer think of the publish button, let's say you're on a blog, as the finish line. That's just the start. There's several other things you have to then do to activate your content. And once again, it's one more thing about marketing that's becoming more labor-intensive and complicated. But he talks about how content shock, there is content shock, but first you need to figure out, would content even make sense for your business?
Yes.
Very honest. There's a lot of content marketing purveyors out there saying, no, content marketing, that's going to solve all your problems and all your dreams will come true. But he's saying that, look, you may be in a vertical or a category where somebody has already built a moat that's going to be hard to scale. You've got to figure out a different way around there. Don't do exactly what they're doing. So I thought that was very refreshing from him. And the other thing that we talked about is when he was getting his MBA at Claremont, he studied under
Peter Drucker.
Yeah, Peter Drucker, the great 20th century management expert. And he talked about, once again, how one of the most famous quotes Drucker said was, and I have it here, because the purpose of business is to create a customer, the business enterprise has two and only two basic functions: marketing and innovation. Marketing and innovation produce results. All the rest are costs. And he explained that, and it ruffles a lot of feathers when people talk about that, and it does require a bit more explanation. But that was a very important quote, and I would urge listeners, if they're not familiar with that, to Google that and read some articles about that. So,
I really enjoyed that part of the book. That was a very insightful chapter.
Yeah. One last thing that I've just found so amusing was where he talked about social media, and he thinks that social media is actually making companies better at marketing. And what he means by that is he quotes some CEO who met him who said, and I'll resist doing it with a Southern accent, but he said, "I love advertising. You write a check and something happens." He says, "Now the people are talking back to me. It's like the deer have guns."
Well, what he says is that because of social and the internet, everybody is equal now, right? When it comes to marketing. And so now that's creating a lot of competition. You've got competition coming from both the top and the bottom.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. At the end of every interview, I asked the author, if readers took only one thing away from your book, what would you hope it would be? What was Mark's?
Mark's one takeaway was, of course, the whole theme of the book is about embracing chaos. But he says just to be patient with yourself. You don't have to have all the answers right now. And I love the collection of challenges, approaches, and thinking that Mark applies to marketing here. It helps to maintain sanity and focus amidst all that chaos that's out there. So I thought it was a phenomenal book. Next up, we've got The 3-Minute Rule, Say Less to Get More from Any Pitch or Presentation by Brant Pinvidic. And this book is about how to deliver and create very tight messaging. And I really love this book. Tell us a little bit about The 3-Minute Rule.
Well, first off, I knew James Muir would like this book.
You know me well.
Yes, and this is a terrific book. So a little bit of backstory. Brant Pinvidic, he's in Hollywood, and he produced some of the biggest reality TV shows like The Biggest Loser, Bar Rescue, Master Chef, and Extreme Makeover Weight Loss Edition. Now, he had to pitch thousands of TV shows to the networks over the years. And he started to realize that certain things worked and certain things didn't. And the main thing was that they understood the concept of the show within the first 3 minutes. And he came to this realization one day when he was walking into a pitch, and who was walking out but Simon Cowell.
Yeah.
And then he saw another big reality TV show producer, Mark Burnett, in the lobby, and he just thought, I'm in between the two biggest reality TV show people. I'm just going to get to the point. So anyway, over the years, he kept refining this pitch, and he realized he got a reputation as the person in Hollywood where everyone understood the pitch. And if they understand your pitch, or if they understand what your business does, you're much more likely to sell. So he has this acronym for his 4-step approach, but you really kind of need to read the book to understand how he arrived at these things. And James, tell the listener what the acronym is and the approach.
Sure. He's got an acronym it's called WHAC, W-H-A-C. And the W is what is it? The H is how does it work? The A is are you sure? And the C is can you do it? That is, can you deliver the results? And all of this is very different. Also, he gives some discussion over hooks. He goes, sometimes the hook doesn't even need to be mentioned, right? It's sort of the conclusion that they come to.
You need to let them discover it.
Yeah, exactly. And so when you do it right, the audience can still see the end coming, but they still want you to take them there, right? Mm-hmm. And he kind of goes into the and then philosophy of writing the story part of it. But that's the framework that he's using to create these 3-minute pitches. And he's got sort of a broad framework that he uses of lots of Post-it notes, and then he's got a way of creating them all and then distilling them back down so that you can get it down to this 3 minutes that is the most salient. And his argument is that people they don't want to have that conversation with you until they understand what it is.
Yes.
Right. And that's very different, right, than the messaging that we've been taught in the past, which is I'm going to give you a shocking statement and then I'm going to prove it. Right. Instead of giving you a statement and then now I have to prove it, he's going to explain what it is first. And then they're kind of, oh, okay, I see that. And then they're ready to take on the rest of it. So it's a very different paradigm. I really liked it.
Yeah. And in the interview, he talked about how quickly people catch on and how seriously suspicious people are. And he talked about how clickbait blog titles don't even work as well as they did 2 years ago. And he talked about how if you make a big claim, like you might hear somebody make in a bad elevator pitch, like, I get 20% return for my clients. Well, the first thing someone's doing now is saying there's a catch.
Right. Or BS.
Or BS, prove it. I'm going to pierce a hole in that armor. So instead, you do that. And he talks about how if there's something you don't want them to find out or know, you better tackle that. And he talked about how he's been hired by a number of corporations to help them with investor relation presentations. And one of the tricks in the book is he says, you've got to sit down and say, what's the one thing you hope they don't find out and that you don't want them to know? Because they are going to find out and they will know it and they're going to keep looking. You should lead with that. And he gave examples of how in the past, this one company had an issue with the way their debt was structured, but they didn't ever want to bring it up. But the analysts at the presentations would say, they'd start tearing that apart. Well, they hired him and they said, look, before we get started, there's an issue with our debt here and we're structuring it this way and here's why and so forth. No questions. In fact, some of the people were like, well, do you guys need more money? It was just, you get that out there.
That also plays into the whole trust factor, right, is when we bring up you think of the thing, what is it you don't want them to know, and then just open up that right away. That increases the trust, and that kind of ties in to his original thing, which is instead of this state a shocking statement and then prove it, he uses an example of Niagara Falls. There was a time when Niagara Falls froze over, and the people were so used to hearing Niagara Falls that when the silence happened because it froze, that it got everybody's attention. And so that's kind of his analogy for the whole strategy of doing it this way, is instead of sounding like all the noise that's out there, you're sort of the opposite of that, right? You're the inverse of it. You're the frozen Niagara Falls, the silence that brings people in. So I think that ties into to that whole message around, what's the thing that you don't want them to know? Mm-hmm. Introduce that into because what he says is the audience will hate you for hiding negative things.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and so he said they're always going to find out. There's no scenario where they don't find out. And so if you don't tell them, then they think you're hiding something, and that changes you into a different kind of person that's a liar, basically. That's what he's saying.
Well, one thing he also talked about in the book was a lot of companies will say, well, Brant, it's just going to take us more than 3 minutes to get our information out there. And he's had big companies come to him and say that. And he said, look, it's not about putting all your information in the first 3 minutes. It's about putting just those 4 things to the point where they will then say, okay, I get it. Well, let me ask you this. So in other words, he's had 45, 90-minute, 3-hour meetings, and they were very successful where they talked about how whatever the show or whatever he was pitching would help them, but it was only because he got it started correctly. So if you have a 90-minute meeting with an interested person that's asking questions and thinking about this, that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, it's not about keeping it to just 3 minutes. It's about making the best 3 minutes.
Yes.
And then that gets you the license to get to the rest of the meeting, right? And so the meeting could go long even, right? You could do an hour, 2 hours. But what brought them into that was that initial 3 minutes where they make their judgment. And that's really the crux of his whole thing is regardless of what you're doing, your audience, first impressions of you are going to be formed pretty much in that first 3 minutes. And so that's why it's so important. Yeah.
And finally, the other thing he talked about is that you should never, ever say or do anything in your pitch that reminds the audience that they're being pitched or sold to.
Mm-hmm.
and people are more suspicious of that now than even in the past. So I think it's a book that's going to be around for a long time, and it really was fantastic. We've started doing it. We want to help clients with it. We've got the Post-it notes all over our board, and just to speak out of school, James Muir has already read the book twice.
I love this book, so I won't lie. And his one takeaway on this one was that his main goal in life is just get people to the point where they can explain what they do and the value of it. Right? Yes. Get to the point where you can just explain what you do and the value of it, so that when you're being judged, they at least understand the value of your offer.
Yes.
Let's move on. Next up, we've got They Ask You Answer, a revolutionary approach to inbound sales, content marketing, and today's digital consumer. This is the revised and updated second edition by Mark Sheridan. And the first book was so phenomenal that I was really excited to read the additional one. I think it's almost 100 pages of extra material in there. So tell us a little bit about the second edition of They Ask You Answer.
As background, for folks that don't know who Marcus Sheridan is, he started a fiberglass pool company in Virginia, 2001, 2008, the real estate market crashed and they almost went out of business. And they didn't have any money left for all the advertising they'd been doing. And so they were starting to have to lay people off. He was at risk of bankruptcy, might lose his house, and he was at the end of his rope. But he just didn't want to give up, typical entrepreneur. And so he started writing articles on his website, answering every question he'd ever gotten from a customer, even ones that his competitors wouldn't want to answer. For instance, how much does a pool cost? Or who are the pool companies in Richmond, Virginia? Or when does it not make sense to buy a fiberglass pool? So he just started this radical transparency, radical honesty approach. And within a year, they were the top traffic pool website in the world.
In the world.
World. Even all the manufacturers were like, who is this guy in rural Virginia that's doing all this, that's beating us on the search engines? And So then that carried over because he one day realized that there were still certain people that were buying and certain that weren't. And he tried to figure out what was it about the ones that were buying. And somehow he realized that those customers, those prospects that had been on his website at least 30 pages, they were buying from him. But those that were not very well informed, they weren't buying. So what he did was they put together a little video, probably shot with an iPhone, that said, here's what happens with when you go get a pool, you dig a hole, you get the permits, basically kind of walking them through, here's what you should expect, because most people may only buy one pool in their lifetime. And then they also had a little ebook, I think a 30-page ebook about everything you need to know about buying a fiberglass pool, which was very helpful, very honest. And they said, we are going to send you this ebook, and we're going to send you this video, and we're going to call you back the day of the appointment. And if you haven't had a chance to read the ebook and watch the video, no problem. We'll just need to reschedule. And maybe 4 or 5 out of the history of the company ever said, hell no, you get down here right now. And at which point they didn't go because they knew they were going to be uninformed customers and not serious. And they were probably rude people anyway. They started closing at like 80% every visit they went on. And so it was just amazing. And so in his book, his first book, as well as the second book, he talks about the things that companies should do. At the heart of it is addressing your customers' fear of doing business with you or doing business with your category. And the ones that really do well at this are teaching. They're not pitching. Teaching is the new pitching. And it's basically informing them. You build a lot of trust with your prospects. They sense that you're pretty transparent. And if you say, just like with Brandt's book, this isn't for everybody, your credibility goes up. So what happens is, he talks about the big 5, which are the 5 things that people tend to search for online, and they want to know. And that's pricing and cost. They want to know about that. Even if you sell something where it's custom, you can still talk about what drives a price up, what drives a price down, what the cost of operating it is, what you need to know. Because when he would go out and he'd say, well, it's about a $50,000 job to put the pool in, and they say, oh, I thought it was $20,000. Well, one day he realized, I'm wasting my time with those people. So he only wanted to talk to people that could clearly pay for it. One of them was, what are the problems with your product? So in other words, he would say, when should I not buy a fiberglass pool? When is concrete a better one? Comparisons. That's where you are comparing your product with another product that's very similar, or the solution to the customer's problem. In other words, should I hire a marketing agency? Should I hire a marketer in-house? There's these comparisons. Reviews, where he would review all the pools, all the manufacturers of pools. And some of them he didn't even carry. But people wanted to know, or they wanted to find reviews of all these things. And the other thing is, he calls that is sort of best in class. So it's really interesting. And he talks about this concept of ostrich marketing, where a lot of companies, I'd say most companies, think, well, we can't really talk about that. We'll let them come to us and ask. Well, if you're not talking about it and somebody else is, they're not coming to talk to you.
Right.
They're going to find that information. The last thing they want to do is talk to somebody that they think is trying to pull the wool over their eyes. So the other thing that's so interesting is how this helps sales teams, where if you are answering every question you could ever get from a customer, the sales team can start sharing this information in the sales process.
He calls it assignment selling is what he calls it, right?
Yes.
So, hey, go read this stuff on the website, and then we'll have our appointment. And like, shocking, if they haven't read the stuff, we don't have the appointment, which is mind blowing. So that's one of a couple of things that I think are really paradigm shifters that are in this book.
And it reminded me of a book called The Perfect Close, where there's a difference between, what is it? You would either advance the sale or you continue.
Continuation.
And an advance is where the customer is having to do something, maybe put their time or they're showing some commitment. Whereas if you're advancing it, like, yeah, sure, you can send me a proposal. I'm not asking for it, but
it's no skin off their back, right?
Yeah. So anyway, I thought that was, so it's one of my favorite books. It's one of, after 260 interviews. There's only been 2 books where I've interviewed an author about the first and second edition, and this was one of the 2. It's just one of my favorite books, and I've seen it work for clients, and it's just amazing.
Well, I don't think we can move on until we say a little bit more about that one. How much does it cost? Because I got to tell you, that is, if I suggest that to a client, they are blown away by the idea that we're going to put their price on the website. And they're doing that ostrich marketing. Well, I'm going to make them ask me for the price, right? But here's what he says in the book that I think, man, this is like worth writing down. What causes people to not contact you is not price, it's ignorance. And so you're not feeding the right wolf, so to speak, when you keep your price off the website. And that is a massive paradigm shift, especially for complex B2B sales, I got to tell you. So that was very fascinating. Also, the assignment selling. Who would give up an appointment if the customer hasn't done their homework? But what a great test to determine whether they're really committed or not. Yes. So I thought this was phenomenal. So his one takeaway on this is just to obsess over buyers, over the way they think, and be willing to act on what you learn about, right? And he kind of breaks that down into obsession about the way they think about the buying process, about the way they want to buy, and the way they want to learn. Those 3 things. So that's just one takeaway. And he gave us a thing we can do. This is funny actually, but he suggested that every website should have a section about who you're not a good fit for, because that sends a message that you only want to work with folks that you can actually benefit. So
yeah, and actually, James, you mentioned there was 100 extra pages. The 100 new pages. Well, the whole book seemed completely updated to me. I'm a careful reader of both books, but he has an entire section on videos that you should have. I think there's like 7 videos that every company should have. You can put them all into one, but you definitely need to have these 7 videos. And if it's really slick, that's not going to work either. You got to have one of your employees, explaining it. Being authentic. And the other one was all about your website, the things you really need to have on your website that sadly too many companies still don't have. So I can't recommend this book highly enough.
Agreed. I mean, this edition did not let me down at all. It was just as practical as the first one, but on steroids. And so I'm doubling down on all the concepts in the book. Totally worth the price of the new edition. All right. Lastly up, we have Social Media Success for Every Brand. The 5 Story Brand Pillars That Turn Posts into Profits by Claire Diaz-Ortiz. Now, I'm a huge fan of Don Miller's book, Building a Story Brand. So I was real excited to see these principles applied to social media by Claire Diaz-Ortiz. So tell us a little bit about Claire's book, Social Media Success for Every Brand.
So I am also a big fan of Donald Miller's book, Building a Story Brand. It's just amazing. And this is the first in a series that's sort of a spin-off of it, where it talks more specifically about how to employ social media once you've got your story brand. But you don't have to have read the story brand book to understand, to get lots and lots of value. But I think all the story brand fans like you and me are going to be reading it. So she talks, now first I should say, she is, I joked with her that when Dos Equis comes out with the most interesting woman in the world, it's going to be Claire Diaz.
Yeah.
Not only does she live in Buenos Aires, she was like an early Twitter employee, and she worked with Pope Benedict to get him on Twitter.
Get him on social, yeah.
That's amazing. She was the woman who got the Pope on Twitter.
She's in the picture, yeah.
Yeah. So in the book, she talks about one of the things that almost everyone gets wrong about social media, or a lot of companies do, and that is that you're supposed to be selling something on social media, when actually the social media activity should be the first step in climbing an engagement ladder.
This is what she's saying. A lot of companies go into social hoping that they're going to sell some stuff online. But what she says, and this is a big insight in the book, probably the biggest insight, is that social media market is mostly brand marketing.
Right. Versus direct marketing.
Correct, right? And so maybe at some point, once you've moved up that sort of that ladder that you talked about, right? Once you've gotten the trust, then you might be able to do a direct type of marketing to them and sell something. And that's the goal, of course. But most people misinterpret what social media is. And so they blast out all these different things trying to sell things. And hey, nobody's buying my stuff with all the links that I'm putting out there. And that's because it's really mostly a brand marketing channel.
Right. And it's not like you have a captive audience either. You actually have to be sort of engaging. It's sort of like going to the party and talking to other people and showing some interest. I don't think anybody listening stays too long when they've met somebody who is only talking about themselves and doesn't seem to have any consciousness of who they're talking to. And that's where I couldn't resist talking about Gary Vaynerchuk and the 19-year-old dude move, which is a famous video where Gary Vaynerchuk is giving a keynote and he is then taking questions. And one guy stood up and said, "Hey, I've got this hot sauce product and this is the name of it. And I was wondering if you could share it with your however many million Twitter followers you have." And Gary Vaynerchuk said, "Well, look, I like your hustle, but you've done the 19-year-old dude move." And the 19-year-old dude move is a metaphor for a 19-year-old dude who thinks he's going to get some serious romantic action on a first date. So, and you see that in social media all the time. And the other thing that it brought to mind was the story she tells at the beginning of the book about this misplaced idea about going viral.
Yeah.
Very little goes viral, and it's almost uncontrollable what you can make go viral. And she told the story about working with a startup, which has closed down. They failed, like a lot of startups do, but it's an interesting point. And she had done a lot of work with them showing, these are the things you should be doing to gain traction, to get more users, so forth and so on. Sounds like very good blocking and tackling. And the only thing they were focused on was the social media. And she could tell in the meeting that they hadn't even looked at this 50-page document that she had prepared and given to them in advance. And the CEO finally just said, if we could just get the Dallas Mavericks owner, Mark Cuban, to tweet about us, it would everything would happen for us right there. That's really all we need to do. And so one of the beginning chapters of the book is Mark Cuban is not going to make your brand go viral. And part of the reason is even if something does go viral, almost all the time, there's no follow-up. It's like, oh, well, what do we do with that? Nothing. There's crickets. It's just not a smart strategic approach. And it's also, as you can sense, tied in with the misuse of social media, which should be more about starting an engagement. And when I say that, I mean, you get some engagement. Think of like a solar system, and the outer ring of the solar system would be social media. And then maybe an inner ring might be something deeper, like getting their email address that they've given to you because they want to get updates. They want to get email, or maybe there's an event that they've had where they're bringing you closer in. But there's too many on the outer ring of that social media solar system who think that's really all they need to be doing.
Yep. She calls it the social ladder, right? Maybe start with a follow, then get a response, then go to the website, then sign up for a newsletter and so on until we've gotten up to the point in our social ladder where we can make a sale. But it's like you said, it starts out there in the outer rim, so to speak.
Yeah.
So she's got a process that she uses to create strategy, right? Since planning to go viral is not a strategy, right. She gets practical, and she's got an acronym she uses called SHARE. So tell us a little bit about the SHARE acronym that she uses for folks to sort of build and execute their social media strategy.
And James, in answer to your unasked question, it's not CHER like the diva.
Like the singer.
The singer, yeah, actress, Academy Award winner, the goddess of pop, okay? It's SHARE. And it's a story where she explains, you do have to tie it into what your story is about your company, which is where the story brand book comes in. How that's, thinking critically about, how many accounts do you actually need? How important is consistency? Things like that. How are you going to do it? There's not one size fits all. There's just a few things you need to be smart about. Audience is A, and that's where, who is your audience? Who do you want your audience to be? What do you know about them? What do they like? Basically, that's where she talked about empathy, which is, you've heard me say before, is the most important word in sales and marketing. And then reach, which is where she joked that the number one question she gets about social media is, how can we get more followers? And she says, of course, that's the wrong question. It's about engagement, not about the total number of followers you have. So she gave this really articulate answer, just like in her book. And I said, okay, great. So how do you get more followers?
But she answers that too.
Yeah, she did. But so anyway, she talked about influencer outreach and some of the other things you should do, but it's really a misguided first question to be asking. And then the last one of SHARE is excellence, where she gives examples of really good social media practices And then there's no shortage of companies that are just really sucking at it. and it doesn't have to be that way. So anyway, and there were lots of other things in there about some of the others. This focused primarily on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. But she also talked about LinkedIn, YouTube, and so forth.
And I think one thing around excellence that she said that is something to take into account is that social media is essentially a real-time platform, right? So that's something you got to plan around is when you get engagement, if you want to take advantage of that engagement, you have to do it in a timely way. So her one takeaway on this one was that social media is really more about brand with the goal of selling something direct later. So you measure your success in your social media strategy more around the brand. And then in terms of the things that they can do, she suggested that you create engagement on a social platform by asking questions. So pick your platform du jour, and she's got a chapter on how to pick the right one. And then ask some questions so that you can start some engagement.
Which reminds me of another book called They Ask, You Answer.
Yeah, you're no kidding.
Hey, maybe there's a trend here.
Yes, this is a great collection of books this week. So social media for success for every brand really just demystifies the social media marketing, I think, and at the same time provides a step-by-step guidance on how to implement your story brand strategy, but using social as your channel. So some really interesting and surprising insights on this one for me anyway. As always, I learned a lot from this month's books, really stellar selections on this one. So tell us about what new books you've got coming up on the Marketing Book Podcast.
So next time, we're going to talk about non-obvious megatrends, how to see what others miss and predict the future by Rohit Bhargava. Fanocracy, turning fans into customers and customers into fans by David Meerman Scott and Reiko Scott. The Will to Die, a murder mystery by Joe Pulizzi, founder of the Content Marketing Institute. It's a fiction, but it has lots of implications for marketers. Alchemy, the dark art and curious science of creating magic in brands, business, and life by Rory Sutherland, who's the vice chairman of Ogilvy in the UK. And finally, Performance Partnerships, the checkered past, changing present, and exciting future of affiliate marketing. So that's it for this month's B2B Growth Show Book Talk. To learn more about the Marketing Book Podcast, visit marketingbookpodcast.com. And to learn more about James and his excellent book, The Perfect Close, visit puremuir.com. And that's spelled PUREMUIR.com. And as I mentioned earlier, if either of us can recommend a specific sales or marketing book or other resource for whatever situation you find yourself in right now, connect with us on LinkedIn where we can chat, and we'll do our best to get you pointed in the right direction and maybe even save you some time. You don't need to read 260 books if I can point you to 2 that would help you right now. But remember, keep learning, because these days the big learners are the big earners.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big 3, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.